Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to Valerie Young, who is an expert on imposter syndrome. So if you have ever had that feeling that you are going to be found out as a fraud, then this is the episode for you. Valerie shares some of the insights from her research and also talks particularly about why imposter syndrome may be experienced by PhD students. She also tells a really funny story about smurfs. So I do hope that you enjoy this episode. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Emma.
This is super exciting for me. I have to say, I totally recommend to anybody doing a podcast because you get to speak to all these people whose work you really admire and you get to ask them lots of questions. And your book really, Valerie, it was just really changed things for me. And I don't say that lightly. Of course, imposter syndrome comes up a lot for PhD students. And so that's why I started looking for researching material. And I saw this book. Okay, I thought I'll look through it. I've got it with me right now. It is full of Post-it notes, highlighted to the max. And, you know, I've done a lot of work on myself, but still I found that having been through your book, I knew myself better. I got to know myself better through it. And what I think is so striking about it, I've recommended it to so many people, especially PhD students, because it's so carefully researched, but it's the practical exercises I think are so brilliant and really take you through a process. So thank you so much for the book and thank you for coming here to talk about it all.
Oh, thank you, Emma. Thank you for your kind words about my book. I really appreciate that.
Oh no, well, it's all true. And so we're going to get into imposter syndrome a bit in a minute, but I always ask people, first of all, about their own experience of graduate study and how you got into the work that you do now. So can you tell us a little bit about that and your own educational journey?
Absolutely. You know, I really kind of stumbled into a doctoral program. I knew nothing about graduate school. No one in my family went to graduate school. My dad had 2 years of college, but that was pretty much it. And I, as an undergraduate student, I took a course on racism and got fascinated by it and really wanted to learn more about the woman who was teaching it. Her name was Judith Katz, and she was a doctoral student in the School of Education at the University of Amherst, where I ended up going to school. And I just wanted to understand, like, how are you doing this? And what are you doing? and tell me everything. And I just wanted to be Judy. So I, she took me down. I kind of, filled out the application and applied and got in. And honestly, I really just stumbled into it. And that was the track I was on initially, was looking at leading groups for white people to understand individual, cultural, and institutional racism. Midway through, though, I learned about the imposter phenomenon as it is more accurately known in the world of psychology. Two psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, coined the term in an article in 1978 called The Imposter Phenomenon Amongst High-Achieving Women. Somebody brought the paper into a class, started reading about these people who feel like they're going to be found out. They're not really as intelligent, capable, competent as people think they are. And I instantly identified, as did all the other graduate students, by the way.
Right.
So I changed my whole focus of my research. And I decided I didn't so much study imposter syndrome. I studied I looked at women's self-limiting attitudes and behaviors. Like, what are the things that might lead us to this place of feeling like imposters? And I'm kind of glad I went at it from that perspective. I can't say it was this, brilliant conscious decision on my part. That's what I wanted to understand, because it's really helped inform my thinking on the sources of imposter syndrome and the solutions. And even though my research was actually with a very highly racially diverse group of 15 professional women. There was 8 women of color and 7 white women. The things that I learned, yes, there's ways that it's more common and problematic for women, imposter feelings. But so much of what I learned, really, even early on, Emma, is just so applicable to men as well. So, like most graduate students, I had no idea what I was doing. Just kind of bumbling around, trying to figure it out like the rest of them.
That's why I always ask this question at the beginning, because I think it's so important to know that, because I think it speaks right to what we're going to talk about in a minute. But seeing people there, you're very, very successful in your field, to know that you came from a place where you didn't really know where you were going, and you found your way through. And if that's what it feels like to people, that they're just kind of finding their way through, then they're probably doing absolutely the right thing.
Join the club.
Yeah, exactly. And I also love that it was an inspirational person that led you in, and that, I think, is truly gorgeous in terms of saying, I want to be you. and then finding out what that means for yourself. Gorgeous. Thank you for that. So you did come into this work, and so I'm going to, there's so much that I could ask you around, but I suppose just generally, could you talk a little bit about the scope of your work, in terms of imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, and perhaps particularly the crusher lie. That for me was a really important concept.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I really have not been doing academic research since I was in graduate school. I did not pursue a career in academia. I mean, instead, I took the findings from my dissertation and I turned it into interactive educational workshops and experiences for adults, which I think was turned out to be very useful, because in psychology, usually, it's a one-on-one, you're going to therapy. And this was more about, understanding yourself. That was a piece of it, but also being given kind of information and insight and tools to be able to kind of talk yourself down off that imposter syndrome ledge a little bit faster. And what you're referring to in terms of the crusher, I wish I could take credit for it, but it came from Gerald Weinstein, who was at the university in the Department of Education when I was there. He was a faculty member, and he had a wonderful whole curriculum called Education of the Self, with a very powerful kind of pedagogy behind it around adult learning and self-awareness. And part of his model, with his permission, and I emphasize that because there's so much plagiarism going on out there in the world right now. With his permission, I modified it a bit and put it in my book, and I've been using it in my workshops for many years. But it's basically it's a I would say process, but process. So you'll see I'm bilingual. It's a process.
I love that. Well, I'm from
Canada,
Essex,
so I say process.
I'm from Essex, so I speak a whole different language. So,
well, Canada too. So I'm very used to project process when I go to Canada. But he has this whole process for looking at and kind of untangling and becoming consciously aware of what is largely an unconscious pattern. So it begins with looking at what are the situations that prompt these feelings, right? It's not when you're walking the dog or doing the dishes. It's, it might be in a meeting, a faculty advisor meeting, right? Or when you're in class and you're called on, or you're asked to get up and make a presentation, or somebody is challenging you on your work, applying for a job, and so on and so forth. Those are the kind of moments where you feel like an imposter. So you think about, fill in the sentence, whenever I'm in a situation where I usually experience feelings of, it's probably not joy and exhilaration. It's probably anxiety, stress, self-consciousness, self-doubt, that kind of thing. And the negative voices in my head start saying, and what I typically do is what? And what we do, and then I kind of took that part, which is look at the behaviors, and I melded it with work that Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes did, looking at people's coping and protecting mechanisms. They came up with a number of them. I've added some of my own over the years, but basically these behaviors we have used unconsciously to both manage the anxiety of waiting to be found out and to actually avoid being found out. So anything from kind of flying under the radar, right? Not speaking up in class, not going for more challenging opportunities or assignments, not basically kind of keeping that kind of low profile and hope nobody notices you so you won't be discovered. Mm-hmm. Procrastination is another big one. I often tell people when I was supposed to be writing my dissertation, I had the cleanest house in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
Never been as clean since. Never starting or finishing is another coping mechanism, which sadly, way too many PhD students drop out and don't finish. Overworking, over-preparing, that's another one. So in other words, these unconscious behaviors we're trying to take care of ourselves. So in that regard, Jerry would say we need to appreciate our pattern, because these patterns are designed to help protect us from something, help us avoid something, or help us get something. And one of the things that they help us avoid that you're alluding to is what Jerry would call kind of coming face to face with what he would call our crusher. Mm. And our crusher is that lie. We might not even be completely consciously aware of it. This lie we tell ourselves about ourselves. Like, I'm not as intelligent as other people around me. A friend of mine, hers was, I'm not an original thinker. Because she had this notion in her mind that if you're going to be a graduate student, you have to come up with some, novel, new, original thing that no one on the planet has ever thought of before, or I'm really, an incompetent fraud, or whatever the little voice is for you. Right. And the thing about crushers is they're always lies. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. They feel like the truth, but they're always lies. And so once you kind of can identify your crusher and what you're getting out of your pattern, so it's helping you avoid failure or humiliation or disappointment or criticism. Or maybe if you procrastinate, guess what? You get time to do things you'd rather be doing. Mm-hmm. So, again, it helps us get something, protect us from something or avoid something, but always at a cost.
I love that. Appreciate your pattern, because I think that brings in all of that sense of self-compassion, that you're doing it for a reason. It's not just coming from nowhere. It's coming for a reason. And that it is a pattern. That is something that has been building up and happens. And as you say, that you're also getting something out of it, that actually that there is a benefit to it in some way, even though it's not necessarily what you think it is. And
that's why you want to understand it, because once I understand the pattern and I understand my behavior, what I'm getting out of it and the cost, then I can make an informed decision, because now I'm consciously aware of it. Yeah. I can say, well, maybe I'm going to keep my lousy pattern because overworking, over-preparing is what made me successful. Right. Or you decide the price is too high because I'm, burning out. Physically, I can't keep up this pace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at least now you can make it's a conscious decision. And let me just add one really quick thing. I love that you said self-compassion, because it was a study out of, I want to say, I know it was out of Austria. I don't want to name the institution because I might get it wrong, but it was a study out of Austria that found that people who had high self-compassion in terms of how they spoke to themselves had less imposter feelings. People who had low self-compassion, who were like always kind of beating themselves up. Oh, you're so stupid, Valerie. Like, why did you say that? That was such a dumb thing. That they're more likely to have more imposter feelings. So it really does matter the words that we use to talk to ourselves.
And the thing is, it's like, it's that quote, isn't it? You're the most important person you'll talk to all day, and you talk to yourself all day. So, and we never talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves. It's shocking. And I think when you say to somebody, wow, would you say that to someone else? And they're like, of course I wouldn't. It's like, well, why do that to yourself? Why say that to yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got this sense of imposter syndrome, the sense of waiting to be found out, the sense of doing all the things to try and stop being found out, and the anxiety around that. And what we're particularly going to talk about then here is this sense of how it's particularly significant for a PhD, because it comes up so often in my discussions with PhD students. What are your thoughts on that, Valerie?
Well, I speak to a lot of PhD students. I've spoken in the US, Canada, Japan, Europe, and the UK. And I always tell my PhD students that they are my favorite audience for two reasons. Number one, they're in such pain. Mm-hmm. And number two, they get my joke. So it's like a perfect combination. Almost by definition, PhD students feel like imposters. The number that's always thrown around, the percentage, is up to 70%. People have had imposter feelings at one time or another. A study out of the UK found CEOs, 80% of CEOs and 82% of managing directors said they sometimes feel out of their depth and that they're struggling in their role. If I was going to, kind of guesstimate, I would say PhD students, it's probably like at least 90%.
Yes.
It's like by design, you're thrown into this situation where you somehow think you should have come out of the womb knowing how to write a dissertation, or how to do research. And how on earth would you ever know that? But we think that we should. So it's a stressful situation. You're in a highly competitive environment. You're in a highly educated environment where, there's that kind of culture of comparison. And then you layer onto an academic culture.
Yes.
And by the way, professors feel like imposters as well. The only study I'm aware of where a higher percentage of men than women, and by the way, there's a lot of men who feel like imposters, but it's rare to see a study where it finds more men feel like imposters. Well, this one study was conducted with college professors, and more men and women felt it. And I think that really goes to some elements of academic culture that fuel self-doubt, not just in students, but also in faculty. So there's lots of, anxiety. It's like you're kind of self-employed in a way, and you've got to kind of figure it out. And yes, there's your advisor, but that he or she, it can feel intimidating. A lot of anxiety around kind of looking stupid, feeling stupid, not being as smart as people around you, thinking, being afraid, because you don't know what you're doing, which of course you don't know what you're doing. Why on earth would you know what you're doing? We don't learn how to do this. We're all kind of thrown into the big PhD pool and said, okay, figure it out, sink or swim.
Yes. And as you say, there's a culture, an unhelpful culture. I was talking to someone about it today in terms of there are those people who will ask you the questions just to make themselves look better and therefore to put you in an uncomfortable position. That does happen in academic culture. So actually the anxiety does come from somewhere. It doesn't come from nowhere. So that sense of being pressed, being put on the spot. And I would love you to tell the story that's in the book, the Martha Beck story.
Oh, yeah, that's funny.
Because it's just such a brilliant.
I haven't told that story for a while, and I did a webinar for graduate students at Northeastern University yesterday, so I did share it with them. Martha Beck was a PhD student at Harvard University. She and her husband were getting their PhD there in psychology, and it's in a book called Expecting Adam, and it's named that because while she was at the university, unexpectedly, she became pregnant. Her son, Adam, had Down syndrome, and that's kind of what the book is about. But in the book, she talked about having this, severe bout of imposter syndrome until one day something happened that changed everything. So she's heading off to class, and she decides to make a stop at a friend's in a laboratory who was conducting some experiments with rats who were swimming in a little plastic children's pool, little kiddie pool that had these blue Smurf cartoon characters on it. And the rats had electrodes, connected to them, and they're swimming around in some experiment. And all of a sudden she realized she's late. She runs off to class, and the professor says, "Oh, Martha, I didn't think you were coming." And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but she essentially said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Professor. I got hung up in this psych lab watching the rats swim in the Smurf pool." To which the professor replies, "Yes, I believe I've read about that. How is Smurf's work going anyway?" And then another graduate student says, "Yes, I believe I've read Smurf's latest paper." And she said it went on that way for a few minutes, and it was suddenly dawning on her. She said, she had gone to many a cocktail party and pretended to know the latest theory or theorist of the day. She said, "I always wondered how I had managed to survive among the staggeringly intelligent people lurking around me. Now I was beginning to understand," right? So the whole scenario ends with the professor saying solemnly, "He's a good man, Smurf is." So that became her mantra, when she was having an imposter moment. She would just say, "He's a good man, Smurfin," just to remind her that, like they're all faking it on one level or another. But
I know.
You're just fooling more people on a higher level is kind of what you feel like when you're in graduate school. But just don't assume that everybody else knows what they're talking about. And I also think in academia, and this is true, it's in law, medicine. I mean, medicine's a little different, obviously, but there's so many, the language can be so kind of dense and convoluted and unnecessarily so, it's just that inside language that it's easy if you don't know the lingo to feel like you're not as intelligent. I can't tell you how many other graduate students would be talking through their dissertation, and I would sit there and I have no idea what they were talking about. And as I look back, I wish I'd say, "Could you say that in plain English?"
Yeah. And they might be challenged to do that because they're writing in a convoluted way because they're trying to cover up. They're not quite sure of where they're going.
Right. And to make it all sound more important. And, it's just, again, it's the language. It's like law, legal documents are so difficult to read unnecessarily so.
But again, I think it's that thing, isn't it, of compassion, of that everyone's just trying to make their way through, and that it is okay. Everybody is just doing their best, I guess. And yeah, I do just love that Smurf story and that sense of it's okay. We're all making it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reality is it's okay to be winging it now and then. We're so hard on ourselves. People who feel like imposters have set this internal bar unsustainably high, and we can kind of hit it sometimes. We have these moments of brilliance. And then we have moments where you just can't put together a whole sentence. But we think we should be on the brilliant end of things 24/7. And I don't think I said this in my book, but when I was in graduate school, I was procrastinating terribly on my dissertation. So I went to somebody she was a writing therapist, which was very helpful because she helped me understand, some of my writing blocks and things that were going on there, but also would take a look at, my outline, my proposal, give me feedback, which was very, very helpful as well. So I went in, week after week for several weeks and telling her how incompetent I was, and I wasn't as intelligent as the other students, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't belong here. And then I decided, I should tell her the other side. So I did point out after a few weeks that I was incredibly intelligent, highly articulate, and, incredibly whatever. And she looked at me and devastated me, "Emma, and only that way your therapist can." And she said, "No, you're not." I was like, well, she ought to know, right? She's my therapist. She said, "You're not incredibly, extraordinarily, exceptionally." She said, "You are going to, achieve the majority of goals you set for yourself in life, as is, most people who apply themselves."
Wow.
And I said, all right, I'll take that, because I was setting myself up. Because again, we all have moments where everything's kind of clicking. You're like, wow, that was pretty good. I was kind of a hot dog. And then we all have moments where it just all falls apart. and most of us spend most of the time in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And I think that is really key for PhD students, because these are people who will have most usually flown through undergraduate education, probably a master's too, and really have had no kind of challenge to that, to the power of their intellect, and then to get to a PhD and be concerned that can they really cut it, and that can be really tough. So yes, I love that. I mean, I feel like that was quite harsh, but actually,
no, she didn't say it in a mean way. She kind of was laughing. She didn't. I misspoke. She didn't say it in a mean way,
right?
But she was really giving me an important kind of lesson and pointing out to me how I was really, setting myself up. It just occurred to me when you were talking. I don't know why, but I was speaking in Canada. I think it was the University of BC. I don't remember, but I remember the student came up to me at the end, graduate student, PhD student, and he said, he whispers to me, "I only believed half of what you said." And I said, "Okay, I'll bite." I knew he wanted to tell me something. And he said he failed his oral exams at Oxford. And I said, "Well, that stinks, right? That sucks. Sorry about that. Like, what did you do about it?" Right. So, like, it's already happened. So, yes. None of us can, we're all going to have setbacks and failures and difficulties and challenges. It's what you do with them that matters. I'm guessing he had probably, very often you have, 6 months, let's say, I know at MIT, you have 6 months to go back and try again. You have one more shot. But I don't get the impression he did that. And he just kind of went off to Canada and decided to get a different degree or something.
Oh, blimey. So that was it for him. That was the end of the story. I failed my thing. That was it.
Yeah.
Wowza. Wow.
Because he was offering it as like proof. So like, see, I only believe half of it because I can prove I'm an imposter because I failed my orals. Well, half of all doctors graduate in the bottom half of their class.
Right. And I guess that is the thing, is that you will be able to find evidence that you are not worthy if you look hard enough, because we're all probably our own harshest critics. But I love the way that you frame things in terms of looking for the resourcefulness that you have, that's fundamentally what's needed, that you talk about that sense of being able to just not be so worried that you don't know everything, because you're going to be able to work through it and find information and kind of rely on yourself to be able to find solutions and find a way through.
Yeah. And, going back to that young man, you could be crushingly disappointed, as he was. You could be crushingly disappointed if you fail, but not ashamed. I mean, the only time you should feel shame is if you didn't really try, or if you procrastinated so long that it showed up in the results. Your listeners might want to Google Princeton professor failure CV.
Right.
He's a tenured Princeton professor, and he posted not only his, very prestigious, impressive success CV, but he also posted his failure CV of all the publications that were rejected, the jobs he was turned down for, the conferences that didn't accept his proposal, the grants he didn't get. And it kind of rocked the academic world, because we think success is this kind of straight shot up. And in reality, it's this, peaks and valleys. And that's real life. And that's kind of ripping the mask off this facade of just one big success story, which it's not.
I'm going to Google it. That is brilliant. There's so much more that I want to talk to you about, Valerie, and I might have to ask you back another time, because I'm aware of time. And I'm going. What will be in the show notes is the details of your book, and I really would recommend it. There's so much more in there. It goes into so much more detail and gives you, as I say, exercises that you can work through to find out the different types of imposter syndrome. That was another thing, in terms of that. There are what you talk about, competence types, that you have an idea of, different people have ideas of what competence looks like, and therefore what in their mind they need to achieve. So yes, go look up that book. But before we finish, I always ask a very kind of unfair question, I guess, in terms of a top tip for people to take away with them. So is there one thing that you would leave us with?
Can I leave you with two?
Go on.
Okay.
It's because it's you and I love your book.
So one of them is that, what everybody wants is to stop feeling like an imposter. But that's not how it works. Feelings are the last to change. That the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. And, people who don't feel like imposters, and I don't mean arrogant people who, have irrational self-confidence syndrome, but people who are humble, but they have just genuinely never had these feelings. They're no more intelligent, capable, competent, talented, qualified than the rest of us. It's just that in the exact same situation where we feel like an imposter, they're thinking different thoughts. And much of that thinking is thinking differently about competence, thinking and responding differently to failure and setbacks, and thinking differently about fear and what all that means. So that's, a lot of what's in my book. The last thing I'd like to leave people with is that this is not all about you. That everybody loses when bright people play small, hold back, drop out, don't finish, burn out. And I figured this out when I was in graduate school. I was procrastinating terribly on writing my dissertation. I'd had all my data. I had, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of data. And now I had to figure out what it all means. And my friend Rita, pre-email, wrote me a letter and said, Valerie, you have to finish because you're learning things that can help a lot of people. And when I got that letter, it just framed it. And I thought, oh my God, how selfish am I? People are waiting for me. I have to hurry. And it was very motivating for me to think about this, not in terms of myself, but whatever small contribution I might be able to add to this much larger conversation going on out there. It would be selfish to not do that.
I love that. And indeed, you are. This book is so helpful. Has been, I know from personal experience and from the people I've recommended the book and then fed back to me how useful this work is. But yeah, to remember that for all of us, we go into this work, into research work, to share some more information, to shine a light on areas that we feel passionate about. Thank you so much, Valerie, for your time, for your wisdom, for getting your work published.
Hardest thing I ever did, writing that book, I'll tell you.
Well, it is truly brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. And I'll speak to you next time.